I hate when people say, oh, it could never happen here, right? Because anything we have learned can happen here. And George Takei's story tells us that. But I was shocked when Roe v. Wade was overturned and watching them. I mean, the Civil Rights Act feels like one of those things that it's like, it seems impossible to believe it was going to be dismantled before they came at it with a hammer, you know? And so I agree. It's like nice to feel a tiny bit, a little bit, a smidgen, a tiny bit of hope.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another fabulous episode of Queer 101, the wonderful podcast where we talk about any and everything under the sun, including queer art, queer literature, queer life, darling. Yeah. And I'm very excited to welcome you back. My name is Peppermint.
And I'm Hugh the historian.
Hey. And we are excited for this episode. We are continuing our several weeks long deep dive extravaganza into our post our interview with George Takei, the legendary George Takei, and his wonderful book. It rhymes with Takei. It's not a memoir. That's not a memoir, is it?
It's a memoir.
It's
a
a graphic novel memoir.
It's everything.
Graphic
Much
memoir.
like George himself. It's everything. I think that's
It's
the
everything,
best way to think
and
about it.
it is everything. How you doing, Hugh?
I'm good. Just still like luxuriating both in like the wonderfulness of our conversation at Comic-Con, which is one of those like total pinch me moments sitting between you and George Takei. Fabulous, incredible with that audience that were so on the edge of their seats. And then thinking more about it over the last few weeks with last week's election here in, well, elections everywhere, but the election last week in New York and Mayor Mamdani, and thinking so much about that idea of like how remarkable George Takei's story is, how much it's centered in immigrants and the way our country treats them, and then to have that moment and to watch a Ugandan immigrant become the mayor of New York with like what, every fucking billionaire on earth rounded up against him. I don't know. It's been making me feel real good. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm in the same vibe. Very happy that Mamdani won the election. I'm very happy that there were some major and moderate, not moderate politically, oh yeah, also politically moderate, victories around the country electorally. And so yeah, I'm on that same high. It does give a little bit of hope and a lot of joy and some hope that, you know, the democracy, it just restores a little bit of faith in the democracy that we've seen be challenged and dismantled, like at its root. Like a lot of the laws and policies that we've seen in our country just being challenged at its root. Like we had been talking about this off camera, you know, like the fact that marriage equality hangs in the balance, and that there's a potential challenge to marriage equality is wild, let alone, you know, the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
Like that they're challenging the integrity of it, and bit by bit, like, you know, knocking down this sort of pillars that sort of that they rest on, these notions and these things that have already been decided. Yeah.
Those things that I agree already have been decided, things that I hate when people say, oh, it could never happen here, right? Because anything we have learned can happen here. And George Takei's story tells us that. But I was shocked when Roe v. Wade was overturned and watching them. I mean, the Civil Rights Act feels like one of those things that it's like, it seems impossible to believe it was going to be dismantled before they came at it with a hammer, you know? And so I agree. It's like nice to feel a tiny bit, a little bit, a smidgen, a tiny bit of hope. And that has been making me think a lot about the strength, the tenacity of the human spirit, the things we can endure, the things we can survive. I think that for a long time now, it has felt a little bit like, oh my God, how are we going to get through this? You know, and seeing people come together, and that is the answer, you know, that people coming together, fighting for things they actually believe in, listening to, again, Mamdani, you know, mentioned trans people in his acceptance speech. Like those things make me feel a sense of actual hope and progress and possibility that I haven't had in a while. So that makes me feel really good. And it brings it right back to George's story and how he survived all of those things, both of his imprisonments, the actual Japanese internment and the closet, and came out the other side as a proponent of very thing that we are just talking about possibly being overturned, but marriage equality, and how that part of his story was so essential that that was one of his ways out of being imprisoned. And so I'm feeling good. It's exciting.
Yeah, same here. And it is really interesting that the notion that people are um currently now, like certainly now, uh when they hear these horror stories. I mean, I think when anybody who grew up in America, I would imagine, hears horror stories about like just extreme violence or mistreatment by any government, that they think, oh, that could never happen here. And we certainly hear stories of other in other countries of, like you know ty- like tyrannical leaders, and think, ooh, thank goodness I live in the States, that could never happen here. But
Mhm.
like it has happened here, obviously with stories like George's family and the Japanese internment camps. But like there have been so many instances that have happened, slaughters, massacres,
Mhm.
of multiple populations, historic, and then like, in recent history, meaning like, as recent as the 80s, where they take whole swaths of people and really just make an example, like, this is how we're going to treat you, which is like
Mhm.
inhumane treatment, uh, basically holding people, I wouldn't say false imprisonment, but like holding people captive, killing them, killing like bunches of people at the same time, dropping bombs, like in
Mhm.
Philadelphia,
Move.
you know,
Yeah.
bombing entire city blocks of people. And so it's wild that that happens, and then it gets like, sort of like glossed over, and then we
Mhm.
we gag when it happens again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that glossing over that propaganda about like it could never happen here, or just the propaganda we live under about prisons in generally, like that this
Hmm.
idea that, oh, prison is about justice, and that, when someone is sent
And
to prison, well,
reform.
yeah, and that we're going to forgive people afterwards, when we know that if you have any touch with the criminal justice system, even if you are found innocent, you are less likely to get a job, less likely to be approved for housing, right? We live, although we don't like to admit it, under a constant state of propaganda about like, what is justice? What does this country do? How do we treat people? And moments like George's book really bring that out, the Japanese internment, which is of course why we barely learn about them in schools at all. And
I
I
don't know
think
that
that
we
it's,
ever, and I ever did in my school.
yeah. Yeah, we didn't learn about that. The AIDS crisis was like happening all around us, and all we learned in my school was like gay people get AIDS. Also, if you're a hemophiliac, you're probably going to die of it. Like nothing about justice, nothing about imprisonment, nothing about the fact that Guantanamo Bay, the infamous prison, was first used to keep AIDS patients. Like it's incredible to me the amount that is of oppression that is normalized, right? That we just kind of exist in and around and then never think about, never talk about, and occasionally you'll get a sort of like, oops, we were wrong 30 years ago, but now we're better.
Yeah, and not only that, not only do we not acknowledge it and sort of whitewash it, but then we also preach about it as if
Mm.
we're not doing it in this moment. We're like, oh, America's all about justice. We're going to go bomb this other country, and so that they can experience the type of freedom and lack of discrimination that we all experience here in the United States. I'm like, are you kidding?
Yeah. And I love this idea. We're going to
Yeah,
bomb our
it's,
way to freedom. You will be bombed until you are free. The beatings
but
will
I
stop
think,
when morale improves.
and I think that the way that they're obviously able to do that so easily is having these different groups that they can constantly sort of like discriminate against, place the blame on. Obviously it's
Mhm.
Japanese Americans and immigrants who are from Japan, but then also, obviously queer people. And I know a lot of people sort of grow up in the start out at least the early part of their life in the closet in some way, shape, or form. Um, and it's definitely not easy for a lot of people to hide being queer, especially if you are femme or
Mm.
even a slightly bit femme, Um, and then to accept it's hard enough to sort of travel through and live in an existence. I'm trying to think back to the 60s. I'm trying to think
Mm.
back and I mean thinking back to the 80s or 90s, when being gay, someone coming out as gay or queer was just like such a major life-changing moment. And it
Oh
can
yeah.
be and it should be for the better, if anything. Um, but that people really were wrestling with, am I going to lose my whole family? Am I going to lose
Mhm.
my whole career, in coming out? And so I know that that's something that obviously George was struggling with when he refers to the closet, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that very idea we're talking about with propaganda and how we pretend things aren't true. Like I think about that time and I think about how many people, like, everyone knew were gay, but they couldn't come out and say it. But everybody could talk about it behind their backs. But it was safe to talk about behind their backs because it wasn't true exactly, even though we all knew it was true. It's like this constant cycling of what is real and unadmitted and what is fake and said openly.
Hmm.
And that dichotomy is what makes it possible, I think, for us so often to do things like ignore the treatment of Japanese Americans or treat queer people as pariahs, and yet if they dare come out, even though everyone's calling them gay behind their backs, make it even worse. It's this
Hmm.
it's about what we cannot accept and admit and yet all know is happening around us. And I think that's why, I mean, one of the reasons why, for me at least, history is so important, because that is a place where we can look back and say, like, oh, we at least can acknowledge with this distance
Hmm.
how much we have gotten wrong, even if we can't acknowledge it today. And that helps, I think, to break us out of this paradigm where we cannot talk about things. Because when look back, you see what we did not talk about and you see how it was wrong. And so George's story, I think, is really important in that sense. It helps us see better the world today.
And I really, to jump, not to change the subject or anything, but I really think the importance of, this is okay. History was always such a boring subject to me, but I think the reason why history was always so boring to me in school was probably because it was learning about a bunch of crotchety old white guys just sitting around, not really having much to do. When because that's the version of history that they were trying to tell us,
Mm.
and we weren't hearing about like different groups of people who were minority groups of women and people, immigrants and people of color, and doing this and fighting back and violently, being oppressed and then fighting back, like resisting. They like removed the resistance out of the thing.
Mhm.
And so if history is about a bunch of crotchety old guys just already having everything that they're going to have and then
Mhm.
talking about it, then of course that's not going to be interesting. If the history has resistance in it, then it's exciting. Then it's an adventure movie. Then it's one of those things that we like to, that we are excited by. And they
Yeah.
remove all that, I think.
One of the absolute, like, total blessings of my life is that I was raised in large part by my grandmother. Grew up in a big family. My grandmother and I shared a room from when I was like 5 to when I was like 14. And she moved here from Ireland. She grew up on a
Hmm.
farm. Her father was a sharecropper for a rich landowner. They had no electricity, they had no running water. She was forced out of school in the fifth grade to work. And she grew up right as Ireland was being divided by the British, right along what would become the border. And by the time she was 9 years old, they were sending armed guards into her town to burn down the farms around her. And she would tell me the story of being a 9 year old and her older brother and her father hiding in a ditch with guns for the men who were coming to burn their farm, who were mercenaries sent by the British. And her older brother
Oh
passed
my
out
God.
and her father gave her the gun. and they waited there, and luckily they didn't come. They went in a different direction. My grandmother and grandfather were great grandfather were not killed that day, and she, continued to live in Ireland until she was 17. At which point she was Catholic. That was the reason, the
Okay.
British were persecuting them. But her father,
Surprise.
at
Yeah.
17, caught her with a Protestant boy, and he tried to kill her. And so she fled to
What?
the US.
Wait,
So my
who tried to kill
grandmother's
who? Her father
story,
tried to kill her?
yeah, yeah, because he could not
Are you
stand
kidding?
the oppressor, the Protestants, the British, right? But he took that violence out on his own daughter. And so she
Oh
fled
my
to the
gosh, that
US.
it's that important.
Yeah. And so my
That is
grandmother's story has
wild.
always been this one of like absolute resistance to colonization, but also understanding that sometimes your own hatred of the people oppressing you can turn you into a monster of
Can
your
turn
own.
into that. Yeah, we're seeing that right
Yeah.
now, you know.
Yeah. And my grandmother ended up a
Uh,
Republican. Like in this, like it's this incredible, her political movements, her fluctuations, but she definitely taught me that if you look at history, you can see that there has always been resistance, and that sometimes those people that people are going to label like a terrorist, they're a 9-year-old girl trying to protect their only
mm-hmm.
way of life they have. And that was a blessing. For me, that taught me so much more about the real meaning of history than what I was actually learning in school. And that was a blessing, really and truly a blessing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is absolutely wild. And we see, I mean, it really all these notions of, you know, oppression and people attacking each other and like stories like what you just shared with your about your grandmother and they really do seem, I mean, it's so cliche to say that history repeating, but they really do seem like the same instances over and over again, the same systems of oppression over and over again.
Yes.
Really with the same agenda or the same uh, 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 goal over and
Mm.
over and over again. And so it's just wild that here we are, and it feels like we haven't really. I can't say we haven't learned. I mean, we literally haven't. If they won't teach it, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's George, I think it's the reason he titled his book, It Rhymes with Decay. I mean, the gay joke, obviously.
Yeah.
But it is that it rhymes over and over again. History doesn't, no, repeat, but it like sounds the same if you listen to the chorus?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what I hope people take out of reading that book. It's what I took out of my grandmother's story. And I think so many of us, if we look backwards, like, I don't know if there's a person in America whose story does not, if they look backwards far enough, have to deal with oppression and violence and
No
colonization.
matter where you're
And
from. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's true. It really is true. Dehumanization, the normalization of oppression, scapegoating. I mean, this is unfortunately always part of history. We are always, not to make it like a giant movie, but in a battle between good and evil, right? We're always wrestling with these things. And there's never a time where any country that I have ever known of has always done the right thing. Although I will say, just going back to my grandmother for one moment, it is
Mm-hmm.
delightful to watch Ireland become the most progressive country in Europe, where for so long it was considered like a
Oh,
backwards. Yeah.
yeah,
Their new
no, go,
president is
yeah.
amazing. She is so
It
exciting.
feels like it is the what ans Ireland is answering what it should have where like it's picking up. I mean, like Ireland, great, wonderful history, but I'm thinking that like just with Ireland's with the history, with the more recent history of Ireland
Mhm.
in the past 100 years, 200 years, 150 years, whatever, that this is like the responses that it's having now are the result of its history for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's just wonderful because it's responding to the types of oppression and stuff that are being and authoritarianism that are happening around the world. It's
Hmm.
responding to that with that history in mind, just like South Africa is.
Yes.
And I think that's wonderful because it really is providing a lifeline. It's almost like Ireland and South Africa are like, oh no, we've seen this before. We're not doing that again. Anybody who needs help, come to us. Like that's what it feels like they're saying. You
Yeah,
know, I
no,
mean,
I
they are.
agree. I think that is it. Yeah. They're models for how to deal with, oh my God, our country did awful things. We, as a country, did awful things to ourselves. Awful things were done to us. And we can learn from that, right? We can come out the other side of these imprisonments, whether those imprisonments are Japanese internment or the Catholic Church or conservative politicians that you elect yourself, or the closet that you put yourself in. Those things, as bad as they are, there can be another side of it, and they can become things that we learn from and that we grow through and that we use as lenses to look at, like, what is happening in Gaza.
100%. And that's how I try in conversation
Hmm.
to uh sort of, because I have a lot of deep conversations. Listen, darling, I'm a deep lady. I have
I
a lot of
expect nothing less.
conversations in my in my conversations with people about Gaza and about the West Bank and Palestine in general. I try my best to the best of my ability, align and not compare, but contextualize
Hmm.
in some way Gaza with and Palestine in general with other instances. Obviously, the Congo and Sudan, Darfur,
Hmm.
but even other moments around the world throughout world history. One of the things in terms of like understanding or contextualizing resistance is like remembering back to what I felt around and the resistance of enslaved people in this hemisphere, country,
Hmm.
hemisphere, whatever you want to call it. Um, and the fact that I didn't learn, the only resistance that I learned about was Harriet Tubman in
Yeah.
school, like as a mention, but
Yeah.
no other. And she was free, at the time that she was running the Underground Railroad.
Hmm.
Uh, but we didn't really learn about like, Nat Turner,
Yeah.
and his rebellion and how he led enslaved people to like really fight back in a very vicious and very violent way. A way I don't want to like I don't want to qualify it by quantify it by saying oh violent, but like it was. I mean, there was a lot of death and
Mm.
weapons and all that stuff to fight back and resist and fight oppression and try to get free and try to free themselves. And then he and the people that were caught were not only killed and punished, but like they were like using his skin and teeth, you know,
Oh.
which is like so brutal. And we don't learn about that. That is a part of American history, you know.
Hmm.
And so I'm really grateful for these like celebrities and people who are using their platforms to speak out against this type of oppression that we're seeing and really use whatever tools that they have at their disposal. And so I've got a lot of celebrity crushes these days, who are really, really walking the walk, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Tell us about them. What are
Hmm.
we thinking?
I mean, I kind of always had a crush on him, but like Mark Ruffalo, I love the way Mark Ruffalo uses his platform.
Hmm.
Uh, and I admire the way that he's able to use it and speak out against the genocide in Gaza. The fact that he's able to use it and really, he doesn't seem to have allowed it to shake his career at all. And I don't really
Hmm.
know what he's experienced like in his like professionally. Like I don't know what his experiences are, what calls he's accepting, or what conversations he's having. But it seems as though he's like full steam ahead and he's doing his thing and he's still working, which is great. And it shows a little bit of a shift in the conversation, which I'm grateful for. So yeah, Mark Ruffalo. But I've
Yeah.
always thought he was fine. I don't know why. He doesn't really have the look of the type of person that I would
Hmm.
usually think is fine. But it's some essence about him that I'm like,
Oh,
I don't know.
I get that. I always thought Billy Joe Armstrong was super cute, even before I knew he was queer, even before I knew he was politically great. I never liked the music. I did not like Green Day. Like, I don't know how I got turned. Maybe I saw a poster somewhere or something, but like his essence, there is something about him that I was like, oh yeah, no, you are doing it right,
Really?
and I appreciate that. But it would be funny because then people would be like, "Oh, you must love Green Day and like pop punk," and I'd be like, no, 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 it's much more shallow than that. And then he turned out to actually be politically great, and I was like, it's not shallow at all. I could read it in his soul somehow.
I love
But
that. Yeah, I mean that's what it is for a lot of people, that attraction, right? Yeah, I actually didn't even know that he was queer, Billy
yeah,
Joe Armstrong. I
came out
did
as
not know.
bisexual like a long time ago, and
Yeah, I
people
just
sort of
looked it
never
up in the
talk about it.
90s.
Yeah, and I
I,
didn't hear about it until way after that. I did not know in the 90s.
I think it wasn't. I think people probably assumed, oh, you're just a punk rocker, so you're probably like whatever your sexuality. They just assumed he was like, they assumed he was queer, but like in the offensive way, not necessarily meaning gay, just
Yeah.
like you're weird or something. You know what I mean? That's what I would imagine because it was never a point of conversation. It was never of interest. It's not like he was like this, like what he was not on the cover of People Magazine's Sexiest Men Alive. So it's not a scandal, I guess, unless you are, you
Yeah, and
know.
he didn't get the cover like that Ellen covered, on Newsweek where she's like, "Yes, I'm gay."
Exactly. Oh my gosh, they're gay.
I
Yeah, that's
I
wild.
know we're past that moment and it's good to be past that moment, but I do love all of those like mid to late 90s, early 2000s, like a celebrity would come out and they would get like a weird photo shoot on the cover of a magazine looking super
For
uncomfortable in
coming
some kind
out.
of for coming out. And you'd be like, that is the worst picture of them ever taken. They're in a bizarre pose. And we don't need to go back there, but I do find all of those hilarious. Part of me wants to like collect them and frame them in like some kind of timeline, you know? Mm.
It is really weird to think back to all of those moments and basically like we'll accept you, moment, which is
Mhm.
really interesting. I know they were trying their best in the very homophobic times to, but it having to like I mean even thinking back to like, um when the studio system in Hollywood was so strong and prevalent and people having to like really pretend about their sexuality, and be closeted,
Mhm.
I mean, it just seems torturous, and of course, you know, it's not like I'm ignorant to what it was like to have, not come out and not yet been out, but like, I could never pretend. I could never like
Mhm.
me like marrying somebody and having, like building a life that was like demonstrably false could not
Mhm.
have happened. Like I would have never made it down the aisle.
Eh, it's funny,
Somebody
when I
been
look
like,
back
"Look at
on
this
those.
bitch."
You look back on some of those actors though who did it, like Paul Lynde and people like that, and you're like, everyone kind of knew, but
We
they all
knew.
pretended not to know, except when it was an insult, and you could say it as an insult, but you couldn't say it as the truth. I mean, it goes right back to that, like these stereotypes that we pretend are true but know aren't true all at the same time, which to me feels exactly like when fucking, like that kind of like whataboutism that you get on the internet where like people will
Yeah.
be like, instead of acknowledging that this country is doing something wrong, or they'll just immediately try to switch the topic and talk about something else, that's wrong, or how someone else is doing that thing, and it's like, on some level that this thing is wrong, which is why you refuse to talk about it as a way of pretending it's not wrong. I don't know, it's the mental gymnastics, I guess, is what I'm getting at, are
Yeah, and it just
incredible.
shows that it really isn't even for the person. Like getting, you need to get if you're a man who's gay, you need to grow up and you need to marry a woman and have kids and live this like sort of fairy tale like typical life and then but even though we can kind of tell there's a little bit of something going on, you're a little zesty, we're not,
A
you
little
need to still
zesty, I
go
like
through
that.
you need to go through all these things and do all these things. Who is that for? Because at the end of the day, then when the I just remember hearing stories about when that wife either discovered or had enough, then suddenly the gay guy was lying to her and putting her through all this stuff. He should have just been honest. But y'all are the ones who pressured people like that to go into these types of situations in the first place. And so, like, which one is it? Just be honest and yourself up front, or like, just go through the motions and get married and do your
Mhm.
thing. And it's just wild to me because that's none of that is for that person, the well-being of that person. It really is for society to be like, well, we know he's gay, but at least he's pretending to be straight. Then
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And then you say, oh, it is. It's not for the person. It's just for society so that we can put on this ruse and say, look, there are no gays. Everyone gets married. Everyone has a job. Everyone gets a house. Everyone has a white picket fence, regardless of what's going on inside of there. And when nobody's happy.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was a kid, I could somehow simultaneously believe like these three things all at the same time. One, that gays were a biblical abomination. Two,
Hmm.
they actually were a modern invention. They were a new thing. And
Hmm.
three, they didn't really exist at all because they had all died of AIDS. And like how society could give me all three of those messages at the same time, you'd
At the
think like they
same
would
time.
interrupt each other, but they don't. You can live with all of these like delusional truths that if you ever were to put them next to each other and really consider them, you're like, these things cannot both be true. And yet, we're taught to hold multiple untruths at the same time, all of which is to keep this sort of like negative peace. This peace that, like you said, it's not about the person, it's not about justice, it's not about taking care, it's not about honesty, it's about not
It's to
disturbing the
uphold.
status quo. Uphold.
Yeah.
Yes. To
Uphold the status
uphold.
quo at all costs, no matter what impact it has on your lives.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, and
Ooh.
there we have it. That's essentially what I think what George was wrestling with,
Mm-hmm.
um, in his career.
Yeah.
And I understand the fear of not wanting to ruin his career or like harm his career by coming out. And I understand that fear
Yeah.
of that because that was literally the it basically was like li- you know, you all have to uphold the patriarchal Christian, you know, sort of heteronormative system that we've built.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has to uphold it, regardless of who you are. White, Christian, heteronormative system. Everyone has to uphold it. You have to work to uphold it, regardless of what it costs you or what the impact on your life. And in addition to that, your happiness and your like personal safety and all that is secondary, to
Mm-hmm.
all of those things. And that's just like, and if you don't do it, you're going to lose your career. Like
Yeah,
that's
you'll
the
be
threat,
destroyed.
I guess. You'll
Mm-hmm.
be destroyed if you don't.
Yeah.
America.
We do what we have to do to survive. I mean, that is one of the other things that comes out of George's book, is like survival
Mhm.
sometimes means doing things that you are don't want to do, that you feel morally compromised in, but when you live in a world that will kill you otherwise, you do those things, and I think the
And I
closet is a great example.
and I do think about this, not to wade into, territories, but I think about like what it takes to accept that type of oh my I just called somebody. What it
Ooh.
takes to accept that
Special
type
guest.
of surprise. What it takes to sort of turn a blind eye, or that's sort of ableist, but turn your back on and sort of like not look at the atrocities that are happening and sort of, excuse them or overlook them that are happening in your own backyard or in your own
Mhm.
situation, the banality of evil, of course, and thinking, I'm just thinking about like what it takes to sacrifice. And honestly, you know, going back to the recent mayoral race in
Mhm.
New York, we had a candidate, a mainstream Democrat candidate, who had been not only credibly accused, but also, also institutionally accused by the department, like the Justice Department, uh,
Mhm.
for sexual harassment of more than a dozen women, and also, you know, at least caught up in a scandal of a cover up with the
Mhm.
deaths of hundreds, I mean, maybe even like 1,000, I think, like elderly people during COVID, and at least improperly handling those situations. And that's like the most generous we can do. And that is the fresh new candidate that we're bringing in to change the system that we have in New York. And the fact that so many people during the campaign were so willing to excuse and overlook all of that just so that they could vote against a Muslim candidate.
Yep.
Or
Yeah.
someone who is, it's either the like the Islamophobia piece, or he's a socialist, he's a communist.
Communist.
You
Yeah.
know, he's a communist or he's a terrorist. But either way, I don't want a communist terrorist. And like those were the two basically boiled down pieces. Or the third one, which is a little bit lighter, is he's just too unqualified. There are people that would say he's not experienced. He's not experienced. It's not that they were saying he's
experience
unqualified.
Cuomo brings is bad.
That's what I'm saying. What experience do you want? And
Yeah.
people were acting like they were excited to vote for Cuomo. What is going on? And the fact that they will overlook that just to uphold whatever system, the status quo. Cuomo, status quo.
Status quo. I like that. That's a good one. And Cuomo is the one who gets a $5 million advance to write about his experiences, right? And it's like, who needs that book? We know what that book is going to say.
I don't care about that book. We already know those
No.
experiences.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's insane. And frankly, that's why one needs to have a book club, because you can get much better books for people who are not being paid $5 million. And in fact, this conversation does bring me around to our next book, which those of you who are in our Alstora book club, hopefully you have already received, Bargain Witch, Essays in Self-Initiation by Brooke Palmieri. And the reason I bring this up is because when I think about what we have been talking about today, the imprisonments that George went through, the normalization of oppression, these stereotypes that we live with, Brooke's book is all about how do you get out of that kind of thing? How do you initiate yourself into being someone different if you have grown up in a world that does not give you models, in a world that did not teach you about your history, in a world that does not show you how to rebel? And how does one self-initiate, which is something that, yes, many witches need to do, but also most queer people need to do. We have to find our own paths out of this, and we have to go from our bodies, our experiences, what you were saying earlier about like trying to think like, how would I feel in that situation? I may not live in the Sudan right now, but I can ask myself like, what would I be feeling if I was the person who is being oppressed, who is being starved, who is being kept out of power because of my political affiliation, my religion, my skin color, what have you. So I am so excited to be talking to Brooke about his book next week. For those of you who are not part of the book club, well, you should join. But we will be talking about Brooke's book for the next couple of weeks moving forward. So pick up a copy on Alstora if you don't have one already, and let us know what self-initiation means to you. We want to know. We want to know what you think about what you learned in school and what you care about. Pat, you know what I love about this podcast? We start off with one theme, and I think I know where we're going to go, but then it takes like the craziest turns into pretty much anything and everything.
Case in point, it's true. Yeah, I agree with you, and I love our conversations, and I hope all the listeners do too.
Yeah, me too. If you're listening, please tell your friends, join the conversation, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or Alstora. Leave us comments and reviews. This whole thing is about communication, so we love to hear from you. And remember, we will be back every single Tuesday. We are here for you, and you can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and of course, and always, my favorite place, Pep's YouTube channel.
That's right, y'all. So please like, subscribe, follow, leave a comment. or a 5-star review if you are listening to this, because that is very important. It costs you nothing and it helps us immensely.
And thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you here next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by us, Peppermint and Hugh, produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig, with original music composed by Nell Balaban.
If you enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and a review. It really helps others discover the show.
You can stay connected and join the conversation by following us at Peppermint 24/7 or write to us at questions@queer101podcast.com.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our history is your history. Stay proud, stay curious, and we'll see you next time on Queer 101.